So I'm going to, what we're going to be asking you to do this year is to look for any bumblebees that have a red tail. And what we're hoping that from that, one is that you will obviously improve your observations of bumblebees and get to know them a lot better. But hopefully in amongst all your wonderful photographs that you'll send us, we will find some bilberry bumblebees. So effectively the change we've made for this year is to take away the onus of identification from you and put that onto us, which means that you can just enjoy taking photographs of our beautiful red tails, and you can leave the identification to us to make sure that that we can find out which ones you found and let you know hopefully subsequently as well. So I've put this slide up really to show you the three main red-tailed bumblebees that you are likely to see. As Richard said earlier, at the moment it's the queen bumblebees that you will have been seeing out and about. But the first one, this one up here, I don't know if is my mouse showing, yeah, is the early bumblebee, and that one probably has already started to establish a nest, and the workers from that nest will be starting to appear quite soon. So if you look at the early bumblebee, it has a very small red tail, so that's the first bee that we're looking for in our gardens. The middle bee is known as the red-tailed bumblebee. That one's quite distinct because it has a very black body, and it has a medium-sized red tail to it. So if you see a bee that to you overall looks black, the chances are you are seeing a red-tailed bumblebee, and that would be your medium-sized tail. And then, of course, the jewel in the crown, which is the one we'll all get excited about, is the bilberry bumblebee. And I think you can see on that photograph, it has got a very large red tail. It covers more than half of the abdomen, together with a very distinct yellow stripe on the top of the head. The only thing of those three that throws a slight change into what you might see later on in the year is that the males of the red-tailed bumblebee can look very like the bilberry bumblebee, and that's where the identification challenge arises. Okay, next slide, please. And these are two that you probably might not see, but I'm just putting them up there because they do also have red tails. The red-shanked cardabee on the left is actually very rare. Richard might want to speak about it, but if you look closely on that hind leg, it has very red distinct hairs on the hind leg. So you never know, we might see one, but I suspect Richard's going to tell us no way. And the one on the right is the cuckoo, is one of our cuckoo bees, and they do behave like the cuckoos of the bird world. They seek out a red-tailed bumblebee nest, and they will supersede the queen and take over that nest for their own purposes. If you see a bumblebee that looks very dark and has very dark wings, if you look at that picture, they have very dark wings, the cuckoo bumblebees, you will probably be aware you've seen something different, and that's one possibility of what you might be seeing. So those are our 5 red-tailed bumblebees. Okay, so what we're asking you to do, next slide. Don't worry if you don't live in the project area, because this year we're encouraging people with gardens in the Stratons to be going out and looking, but also go take a walk. You might want to use the map that Charlie was showing and look for bilberry bumblebees somewhere where we haven't recorded them before. Anywhere in the project area would be absolutely wonderful if you want to go and look for red-tailed bumblebees. They may well be up on the top of the mountain if you're lucky enough to see the bilberry bumblebees, but in the wet flushes, in the meadows, in the hedgerows, just look. And if you see one, stop. That's the main thing, because you won't always with these bees, and depending on which flower they're foraging on, you won't necessarily see the bee immediately. So stop, have a look, listen. You will know yourselves when you hear that distinctive buzz of a bumblebee, and that's the best way of trying to locate where they are. particularly if it's in more of a closed flower rather than an open one. And once you've located a rough area where that bumblebee might be, if you keep looking, you will see it, because of course they're moving from one flower to another. They're collecting pollen and nectar. And so you should be able to spot exactly where that bee is. So having spotted it, next slide, please. We're very lucky nowadays that most of us with our smartphones can take a half reasonable picture. Richard will talk in a moment about how to do that. But remember that if you take a photograph, it's so easy now to zoom in on some of the details, provided it's in focus. We should be able to give a reasonable identification from it. So take the photograph of your red or orange-tailed bumblebee. We've put orange in there because as the season continues, sometimes that red can fade. So it can look more orange than it is red. So just be aware of that as the season goes on. We would like a location because, as you can see from the project last year, we need to be able to pinpoint an area where that bee was seen. Don't worry if you're not used to using 4-figure Ordnance Survey references, although they are very useful. You could just give an area name, a street name, your postcode. Those will all help us to pinpoint where it is. There's a very good app that Ordnance Survey will provide for you, where you can actually get it wherever you're standing. It will give you your 6-figure coordinates. So if you're happy with
I think we've lost Debbie.
In full flow.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's just wait and see if she is able to reconnect. I suspect she was about to tell you the name of the OS app that she mentioned. It's called OS Locate, and I think that's a free app. There are quite a lot of other ones out there if you search for Grid Reference app. There's also another one that people are using called What 3 Words. I don't know if you've come across that, but it divides the globe up into 3 meter by 3 meter squares, and it allocates each of those squares 3 words. So again, if you're not as comfortable using grid references and you want to send us the What 3 Words location, then that's absolutely fine as well. Debbie, are you back or are you still? No. Internet connection problems, I think. So again, if you are able to identify the plant species that the bee is foraging on, then that's extra information that's useful for us. But don't worry if you're not able to do that. It's more important that we get the bee and the location. And all you need to do with the results is to send them to me. My email address is up there at the bottom, and I'll also send it out in an email after this presentation as well. I will say, don't worry if we don't get back to you straight away. There might be a few reasons for that. Firstly, I might not be able to identify the bee myself, and I might have to escalate it up to Richard or one of his colleagues. Also, I'll probably just wait until I've got a batch to do all at once, so I can kind of get into the BID zone and sort of do them all at once. So if we don't get back to you for a week or a couple of weeks, please don't be offended. We will get back to you eventually with an identification if that's possible from the photograph. But it might not be instantaneous, that's all. Okay, so I think that was the final slide from Debbie. Yeah, it was. So I'm going to pass back to Richard now, and Richard's just going to run through how to take a photograph of a bee that will aid identification.
I'll just share my screen again. That one. So yeah, the first thing is that bees are difficult to ID from photos. So do, as Debbie said before she was so rudely interrupted, try and zoom in, get several photos and generally make sure they're in focus and all that sort of stuff. There are a lot of similar species. The ID features are spread out across the bee. It's not that you just need to get one particular bit in focus and that's all you need. Unfortunately, they've got an annoying spread of bits on the front end, bits on the back, bits on the side, and that kind of thing. And they tend not to show all of those ID features as they're sat on flowers. You also lose a little bit of information on things like size and how it's behaving and that sort of thing. So it's worth just describing those in your email as well, just to help fill in those gaps. But this is your standard bee on flower picture. And you can see the thorax fairly well. I'd be fairly happy to say that that hasn't got any bands on it or anything like that. You can see that it's got a head, but I'd struggle to say much more about any of the features of it. Can't see the abdomen hardly at all, can't see the tail in the slightest, and the legs, again, you can just about make out that they're there, but you can't see any of the important ID features on them. So it's not a particularly straightforward photo to actually identify the bee from, even though it's all nice and in focus and that kind of thing. So the key thing is to make sure that as much of the bee as possible is actually in shot. As I said, take multiple pictures. That's much easier than trying to get it all in one. Make sure that they are in focus and ideally relatively close up. It's very difficult to identify a blob that's about 3 pixels big in the middle of your picture. And the easiest way to do that is to take multiple pictures from different angles or to video it as you go around, particularly if it's sat in a fairly placid way on a flower or whatever, and you can move your camera all around it and you can video it from those different angles without having to do lots of clicking and that kind of thing. So we get all sorts of fairly difficult pictures, and that there's not a huge amount that we can do with pictures like that, particularly when it's difficult species or even when it's in focus, but it's a tiny dot in the middle. Those you can get somewhere with them. You can probably narrow it down to a few species, but it's very difficult to actually get to one particular species. And particularly when it's a rare species like the bilberry bumblebee, it's quite important that we're sure of what we've seen rather than having a guess. There are a whole load of different features which come into Bumblebee ID, which is why it's difficult to get all of those ID features in the same shot at the same time. The best single shot, so ideally the one that you go for first, is this sort of side-on, unobstructed view of the side of the bee. Sometimes it's in flight, that's obviously quite difficult, but having it sat on a flower like this one on chives, you can see the antennae, you can see the head, you can see the colour of the thorax, you can see the colour of the abdomen and how that changes as you get down to the tip. You can see the legs, whether or not it's got pollen, whether or not it's got a pollen basket. So from those sort of pictures, it's as easy as it's going to be to identify it from an actual picture. You still can't see some of the features particularly well, although you can see those. You can't see the face particularly well, and you can't see the antennae particularly well. You don't need those in great detail for most bumblebees, but you do for some of them. So it is useful if you can include them as well. And generally, if you get a head-on pic, it also helps you with filling in details of the thorax and the banding pattern and that kind of thing. So ideally, once you've got your side-on picture or you've got a view from the side in your video, a picture from the back end is really helpful. This obviously isn't going to win any awards as a picture in itself, but it does mean that immediately you can narrow that bee down to 2 species because it's got a white tail and it's got little yellow saddlebags on the side. It's immediately one of 2, even though I can't see the rest of it. And so allied to a side picture, that becomes an identifiable bee. So the actual colour of the tail itself is important, whether or not it's got patches at the side here, whether or not this tip of the tail is a different colour to the rest of the tail. And it can also help because you can see the shape of the back end of the bee with sexing it. And male bumblebees look very different to female bumblebees of the same species. So it's quite useful of knowing what you're dealing with. And lastly, that sort of head-on picture that I mentioned, again, you can see the head really well. You can see whether it's got a long face or a short face. You can see the antennae. You can see how much facial hair it's got. Male bumblebees have moustaches, and in many species those moustaches are bright yellow, so it's a really quite useful ID feature as well. So those 3 angles are the best way of being able to take pictures of a bee and have it identifiable, and will make Charlie's life much easier if she gets that sort of 3-view, particularly, as I said right back at the start, if you can get a little bit of extra information in the email about what it was doing, what it was feeding on, and anything extra that might be helpful. Size is really quite useful as well. But pictures in focus with the bee relatively central and a decent sort of size are the key, whether those are photos or videos. The more angles you can get, the better within that. And that's me.
Great, thanks, Richard. I think as well, sometimes taking a film is quite a good idea if you can, because obviously we can make stills from a short video clip. It can be a bit big to email sometimes, but yeah.
The only thing I would say with videos is just make sure that it is in focus. Cameras find it much harder to focus during the video, but yeah, it's a nice combination.
Yeah, and yeah, as a combination, a film and a series of photographs would be the ideal, I think. But yeah, obviously just do the best you can. It's not always the easiest thing to photograph a bee, especially when it's buzzing around. So just yeah, do what you can and send in what you've got, and we'll try our best. But I guess the thing to say is don't be disappointed if we're unable to identify it, because you know, I know now that we're probably not going to be able to identify every single photograph that we're sent.
I should point out that although I put those 3 photos as examples of what not to do, we were able to get to species for each of them. So it is feasible, just easier if you've got the decent views.
Yeah, great. Okay, so the next section is how to submit your results, and actually we've already covered that. I think it's just a case of emailing those to me, and to remember the important things to include are who, so that's who you are, not who the bee is, so we can get back in touch, and also so we can attribute that record to you in the future. Where you are, and we've covered the different ways of working out where you are and submitting that information, and also when, so just a date, and a time of day is sometimes quite interesting as well, but mainly just the date is the important one there. And in terms of the other W, the what, or the species, by all means do have a go at identifying it yourself. You know, it's quite nice if you can send me a picture and also your idea of what it might be. We'll send out some links to various bee identification guides. And obviously you've seen a few pictures of different species this evening, but have a go, and yeah, we can see whether it's identifiable and if you're correct or not. So yeah, I welcome suggestions as to what species it might be. I think Debbie, are you back?
I am indeed.
You're back, yay.
Sorry about the crash.
That's all right.
It's definitely a problem with my computer, so I apologise to everyone.
Is there anything you need to add, Debbie?
I think you covered the last slide, did you, Charlie? Yeah, that's
yes,
fine.
Yeah.
No, I think that covers everything. I mean, I think what's lovely about this new approach is that it means it doesn't matter where you live. You can, because a lot of us who don't live in the project area travel in, we do our walks in the area and enjoy it, and it means whatever walk you're able to do, you can be involved in the project. So I'm hoping, you know, we'll get a good participation in it.
Great. So in terms of next steps, then I guess the first thing to say is that this time next week there will be another one of these sessions, and this is a slightly more advanced survey. Debbie, do you want to just say a few words about next week?
Yes, I think I'm entering possibly the realms of overambition again, Richard. What I wanted was to have a second project that would encourage people with more recording skills who want a challenge to have something else to sort of be looking for when they go out on their wanderings. I was aware when I was looking at the records for the Stretton Hills that we do have the possibility of a couple of other rare species, which are the moss carder and the brown banded carder bee. There have been 1 or 2 reports of them. It will depend on people taking quite good photographs in order to get that level of identification. But I just thought that as we definitely have the Carder bees, and there's a lovely link obviously with Cardigan Mill Valley, it would be quite interesting to see whether we could expand on our knowledge of that bee and, you know, where we're finding it, if at all, in the area. So Richard is going to help train us all, including me, in how to do this. And obviously anyone participating in that will also be encouraging you to look for the bilberry bumblebee as well whilst you're on your travels, because that's equally important. Richard, was there anything you wanted to add to that bit?
No, I think that's covered it.
So if you are interested in taking part in that sort of extended survey, then if you haven't already registered for next week, then just drop me an email and I'll send you the link. But yeah, as Debbie said, it's slightly more advanced, and it will really require the bee to be caught in a net and popped into a pot so you can get a really good look at it, because the identification is going to be a lot trickier than with the bilberry bumblebee. But yeah, obviously anybody is welcome to have a go and to join us next week. Same time, same place. So as I mentioned, this video will be popped online, so we'll have a YouTube version of it, so you'll be able to watch sections again if that's helpful, if you want to recap on the method or the different species of bumblebees with red tails or anything like that. So I will send that link out as a follow-up. In that follow-up email, I'll also include various other things, bits of information, a sort of recap on the survey method, and links to some helpful things on the Bumblebee Conservation Trust and elsewhere. So look out for that follow-up email before the end of the week. And I think that's probably it in terms of the next steps, Debbie. We're going to have a Q&A session now, so if anyone wants to ask any of the speakers any questions on any of the topics that we've covered tonight, then I did sort of suggest that we use that raise hands function, but actually there were, we could try and see how that goes. It might be that people can just unmute and ask, but if we start with the using raise hand functions, and just a reminder, if you click on participants in the bottom menu, that will bring up a list and then you can raise your hand in there. And I think we have a question from Suze, if you want to unmute and ask, Suze. Nope. Suze, do you want to ask a question? Okay, Alice, have you got a question?
Hi, yes, we're very much on the edge of the survey area. We're in the Ray Valley, but we, as smallholders, we not only have goat willow, but we also grow blueberries. So is there any chance that the bilberry would sort of be feeding on other species in the genus?
Richard, do you want to take that?
I was trying to remember if I'd seen any reference to him, but certainly it will feed on quite a lot of other things at different times of the year. It seems to have quite a tight linkage to bilberry when the bilberry is in flower, but obviously the bilberry doesn't flower for the full flight period of the bee. So they will go off and feed on quite a few other things. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if they came onto that sort of habitat. As I think Jenny mentioned, they certainly take quite a lot of willow in the spring.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Suze? Well, I'm afraid we can't hear you if you are asking. If you want to type your question in the chat, Suze, maybe that's the best way. Any other questions while Suze does that? Well, whilst we wait for Susan's question, I'm just going to give a plug for the Stepping Stones newsletter. If you're not already signed up to that and you want to be, then just drop me an email and I'll add you to the mailing list for that. And it's through that route that you'll hear about this sort of event in the future, training courses, webinars, and hopefully at some point face-to-face events again. Let's keep our fingers crossed for that. But we do have some training courses coming up. We're going to have some scythe training courses and also some volunteer sessions doing some fencing to protect some newly planted woodland, and some meadow restoration work parties hopefully in the summer as well. So yeah, best way to keep in touch with all of that is to sign up to the Stepping Stones newsletter. And yeah, we've got Susan's question. Is there a recording comparing the pitch of the buzzing of the bilberry bumblebee? I guess that is. So Richard, are there any buzzing recordings out there?
I'm not aware of any that are obviously available. I'm sure there are some on videos and that kind of thing, but it isn't a species which has a particularly distinctive buzz. It's not like the shrill carder. So it's a similar size and quite closely related to the early bumblebee. So it will be, I imagine, quite closely related to that in terms of the sound as well. So you're likely to get those in your garden. I saw my first worker of them today, so they're out. Once you spot those, see what they sound like and listen for the same noise when you're out on the moors.
Debbie, anything to add?
I'll have a look through my files. I did have a bit of experimentation with trying to record the bilberry bumblebee. So if I've got something worth sharing, I will pass it to you, Charlie, and maybe we can get that out to people as a comparison. Yeah, give it a go. It's certainly an interesting area, I think, for research, because the more you watch bumblebees and the more you listen, you become much more aware of the different pitches. I think, Richard, I'm right, it's mostly related to the size of the bee, isn't it? But
basically, yeah, it's a harmonic size of the bee and how quickly it's flapping.
Yeah.
Great. Paul's got a question. Oh, sorry, Paul, I don't think we can hear you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, you did show some information about the travel of these bees and how they really don't like moving very far away from the heathland. So for the people who live right on the edge of this project area, you're still happy to receive red-tailed pictures, you know, given the chance that it's going to be a pretty slim chance.
Well, it might be a slim chance, but it is still a chance. Okay. And also, any record that we can identify the bee is a biological record that didn't previously exist. So it all adds to the picture of our knowledge of bumblebees in the area. So yeah, very happy to receive any sort of record from the area. And you never know, it might be that we just don't know enough about these bees yet, and they do actually travel. Sorry, I'm being attacked by a cat. And that, you know, they do actually travel a lot more than we think they do. So yeah, any pictures welcome.
So you said there was one record I saw that one of the outliers was in the north near Pontesbury there. I mean, are those records on iRecord? Could I find a date for when that was found?
Yeah, so those are records that Andy got from a variety of different sources, probably iRecord, and also the Shropshire Environmental Database of biological records for Shropshire, and I think one or two other sources as well, but it should be on iRecord. Okay. If it's not, then drop me an email and I'll see if Andy can find out any more details about that record. It'd be quite interesting to see when some of those outlying records were made.
Yeah, thanks.
Roger and Lorraine, you got a question?
Yes, hi. It isn't a question actually. It was just a reminder. It struck me as significant that the records on the Stretton Hills all seem to be concentrated on the roads and tracks. And at this time of the year, you know, we shouldn't be going off track because of the nesting birds, and that we do need to stick to the pathways and the tracks.
Yeah, two good points there. The first, that any species distribution map is in some ways a map of recorder effort as well as possibly the true species distribution. And also, yeah, really good point about breeding birds. We need to be very mindful of that. So yeah, please just stick as much as possible to footpaths and roads. Okay, any further questions? Okay, well, just to thank all our speakers, really, especially Richard, who has given up his evening to be with us tonight. So thanks, Richard, and obviously Debbie for just being the energy and the driving force behind this whole thing, and Jen as well for all your research and writing up that project report. And obviously everyone else for volunteering to be a part of this. So as I said, please send any photos in to me, and there might be a short gap before we get back to you, but we will get back to you. And you're sort of on our mailing list for this project now, so we will send you updates, and we'll send you a final report at the end of the season once we've had a chance to look at all the records and find some results. Obviously, if you don't want to receive any of those emails, let me know. Oh, sorry, we've got a question just coming in from Alice. Alice, you're on mute if you were asking a question. No. Okay, maybe an accidental hand raise. So yeah, thanks everyone. And as I said, we'll send a follow-up email out in the next few days. So have a look for that. And hopefully see some of you next Monday evening. Okay, thanks everyone. See you soon.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye.